you remember we had that little chat about what you'd be if you weren't a journalist?
Yeah.
I can't even remember what I said. Oh, post.
Yeah.
Post, yeah. Okay. Apart from that, because that just came, but the one thing I really would have liked to have got into at some point in my life was coffee.
Yeah.
Because I think there's such a markup on it.
Oh, there's a huge...
And if you want to sit back, feet up at the Caribbean, lapping waters, cocktail in your hand, sell coffee. There seems to be a massive markup on it. There doesn't seem to ever be enough coffee shops in this town.
No.
Everybody gives out ding-dong about the price of them. And yet we...
Keep going.
Actually, you and I are probably some of the biggest customers.
Big time.
We actually should be brought on
coffee
marketing
100%.
holidays
Total and utter addict.
Any coffee company wants to sponsor us, we're here. Our souls.
Yeah.
And all we actually want is just coffee.
Free gear.
Anyway, so I had often thought about that. But of course, and we also, the other thing we talk about is what do these sort of, Kinahan Cartel organised crime figures do when they are no longer involved in crime? And actually, it's just the perfect meeting of those two worlds because two Kinahan Cartel figures have gone into business together pushing coffee. On the streets of Dublin.
Or as our Alan Cherry wrote, pushing high quality Colombian product. But coffee beans on this occasion.
Beans, they're too late really pushing Colombia. I think it's Ecuador.
Is it right? Well, we won't fall out over that. But I mean,
there's a pun on the Coke for anyone who doesn't get it. But anyway,
do you have to explain the pun?
Yeah, sometimes you do.
Okay.
My mother wouldn't have got that.
Okay.
She doesn't listen, so it doesn't matter.
So I mean, so like Liam Brannigan and Dean Howe would have been named as members of the people involved in the Crumlin-Drimnagh feud. So you're talking, that's over 24 years ago, I suppose, when that kicks off. So both Liam Brannigan and Dean Howe have been mentioned in those circles for over 2 decades. Liam Brannigan in particular would have been regarded as one of the more senior members of the Kinahan Cartel remaining in Ireland and operating in Ireland. Dean Howe, again, would have achieved a certain amount of infamy, I suppose, when Martin the Viper Foley was shot in a non-fatal shooting. Foley, obviously, it is reported Foley believed he was going to die, and as the emergency services arrived at the scene, he gave them a name. He said Dean Howe. Yeah. Dean Howe was ultimately arrested in connection with that shooting, but was never charged. So these guys have been...
So Dean Howe's been around since the dawn of day when it comes to sort of that whole Crumlin-Drimnagh stroke Kinahan Cartel. What age is he? Because he looks as if he's sold his soul to the devil.
Well, he's
so young looking.
He does look well.
He's about 24.
He does, but he had been named from the very start. Liam Brannigan...
He's in his 40s, yeah?
He must be in his early 40s, yeah. So Liam Brannigan, of course, would have been a cousin of Fat Freddie Thompson. Dean Howe would be a cousin of the Byrnes, of Liam Byrne and David Byrne, who was ultimately killed in the Regency Hotel. So they all have these interconnected family connections.
Liam Brannigan, has also along the way proved that it's not just criminality he's interested in.
Yeah, he would have been a more unusual character.
Wasn't he a student of...
Well, it's certainly at one point he ended up studying archaeology in UCD, doing an arts degree.
Archaeology?
But it was reported as architecture, but I actually think it was archaeology. He was doing an arts degree in UCD. He seemed to go through different cycles, certainly was being named at the sort of height of the Crumlin-Drimnagh feud, and then maybe seemed to drop off for a while. And then he started to reappear in pictures in the Sunday World. There's a famous picture of him, I think, with Daniel Kinahan. I think it's in the Regency Hotel the night before the shooting. There was
at the Boxing Way, and it was it was out City West.
Was it in City West? Sorry.
Years before. I think Macklin was over, and there was a gathering of them in about 2014 or 15.
Was it? Yeah.
That was. He has very much been in there, part of it. It's interesting, this story, because, of course, they're together. They have opened a coffee shop. There's the streets of Dublin 8.
Yeah.
Patrick Street.
Called
Patrick Street Cathedral.
Yeah.
We had a conversation here when Brannigan was getting out, and Dean Howe, about how lone alone they were going to be, essentially,
Yeah.
because a huge amount of the Kinahan cartel are still locked up in
Yeah.
jail. They're still serving sentences. They're coming to the ends of them, but they're not there yet. And that they were really going to be out there alone, and what were they going to do? Were they going to keep their heads down? Would they stay in Ireland? Would they feel safe enough? So they've opened, and Dean Howe is standing at the hatch of a
Yeah.
coffee shop on one of the,
busiest thoroughfares,
thoroughfares into Dublin city centre.
Yeah.
So obviously there isn't a feeling of, you get the same from the Hutch side. We see
Absolutely.
constantly members of the Hutch organisation who might once have been under threat walking around quite openly, looking as if they're feeling no threat. Now, of course, there is a belief that it has been put to bed, the Kinahan-Hutch feud. Has that actually happened? I wonder, in the background, in the underworld, has some agreement been found or been made without our knowledge, obviously, but that they are that confident?
Well, I think somebody has had a word somewhere and said, if you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. I really would think that. I mean, there have been reports in the Star, for example, that senior members of both sides were spotted at a football match, standing there relatively comfortably. There are people facing charges living in Dublin city centre next to members of the two organisations. This seems to be okay. We know for a fact that Gerry Hutch walked around Dublin, walked around parts of the city where there would be members of the Kinahan faction, seemingly without too much worry. I mean, there's not going to be a formal peace deal signed in Camp David, and whether you could count on people to follow through on that. But certainly, there probably is a recognition
There's a confidence from both sides that they can get on with life and they can do it in their home city, which was once a place where they were only travelling in groups.
Yeah,
with
certainly,
protection, with bulletproof vests on, and where each side was feared of the other.
Certainly, if you look at Patsy Hutch, Gerry Hutch's brother, I mean, he was put under 24-hour guard of protection for a number of years. And even while receiving that protection, there was a concerted effort, a number of different attempts to take his life. Now, in recent times, Patsy Hutch doesn't have that protection, as everybody knows, and doesn't seem to fear that he's going to be targeted. So I think there is a recognition that
something happened towards the end of 2018, 2019.
Yeah. So look, we don't know. Again, you're not going to be able to say there's a peace deal signed.
You don't need to be a rocket scientist, though. It's that's all about intelligence gathering. It's what you observe, what you see.
Yeah.
It's like you see who's sitting where in a car. You see who's talking to who, the way they're talking to them. You can see a hierarchy.
Yeah.
And to me, that coupled with the activities of the Hutch organised crime group, certainly members that had previously been targeted. I mean, look, for God's sake, Gerry Hutch is talking about going for election.
Yeah, so it is a different world. And I mean, if you think of Dean Howe and Liam Brannigan, I mean, they were both served, sentences for their roles in attempted hits on members of the Hutch faction. Dean Howe
was arrested, was he, and questioned in relation to an attempted hit on John Hutch.
He was arrested, yes.
Monk's brother.
Now, he was never charged in connection with that, but he was taken into custody. Certainly the Hutch faction would have been aware of that. He ultimately did serve a sentence for his role on another attempted hit on a member of the Hutch faction who we can't name for legal reasons. He was in charge of, the court heard Howe was in charge of surveillance and tracking devices, and that Liam Brannigan was at the centre of the plot, really directing operations on the ground. Liam Brannigan ultimately was recorded. He was bugged by Gardaí while he was attempting to sort of carry out this hit, really, with the help of Alan Wilson, a notorious gunman, and Alan Wilson's nephew Luke Wilson. Obviously, that was ultimately unsuccessful, but you could hear Liam Brannigan's own words during that. You were in court for that, for some of those taped conversations, in which he seemed, to all intents and purposes, to be answering directly to Daniel Kinahan.
So, I mean, look, what about the coffee industry?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting that the two guys have put their names. It's not a secret.
It's a public document.
It's a public document. They've registered the business. They are down as directors of this company. It's a small coffee. It's not a coffee shop, I suppose. It's one of these coffee stand kind of places that's next to another business. It's a small business, but they're obviously, we know that. You see these guys setting up these companies and they're dodgy and they're these sort of it doesn't appear to be like that. They're working there directly themselves. Maybe they have come to the realisation, and it was said to me in the past that Liam Brannigan had come to that realisation a few times that the life of crime wasn't for him, but he ended up going back and
That's
getting
the problem
into it again.
You know, you get when you're surrounded, as these two guys are. Okay, let's give them the benefit. They're going straight and they're trying to make an honest living from selling coffee, but you're surrounded by relatives, by friends, by everything you grew up with, and into this criminality. It's very hard to break free from that, isn't it? Totally. It
is, but it was, of course, said, I think we said it ourselves, that Liam Brannigan wasn't said to have enjoyed prison at all, that there's some people seem to be able to go into prison and switch off their brains and do their time in a certain way, but that he wasn't one of those types. He hadn't actually, I think, received any lengthy prison sentences in advance of the most recent case, and he was in Portlaoise prison, where he was regarded as kind of one of the higher security inmates, but he didn't seem to have enjoyed it, or not that maybe people are expected to it. Yeah, some people have a kind of a hardened attitude.
See, in the middle of this, and when you step back from it, and probably it'll take another few years really to fully understand what has gone on, but the collapse of the bomber Kavanagh empire seems to have almost created the ability for the two sides, the Hutch, the Kinahan side, to have found some peace amongst one another in their own neighbourhoods, cities, whatever. It's like that Kavanagh, Byrne sort of involvement in that feud made it toxic and made it last longer.
Yeah. Well, it was also
certainly very significant, the fact that Bomber's gone and various other members of his grouping have been, his grouping has been dismantled, no doubt. Bomber Kavanagh is still trying to plot and plan and move drugs and make money from his jail cell.
Yeah.
But, how significant a player can you be when you're locked up? But certainly the violence and that insatiable appetite for revenge seems to have very much found its heart there within that Kavanagh-Byrne faction.
Yeah, and I think there was as well, they pumped in the resources. If you look at this Liam Brannigan, he had the guys with him, the two Wilsons. I mean, Wilsons had no skin in the game.
Alan
and Luke Wilson.
Luke Wilson, yeah.
So they were merely
hard.
Yeah, and they were doing it for money. They weren't doing it for revenge for David Byrne's death or anything like it. In fact, like the Kinahan organisation or the Bomber organisation, there was a lot of the people that ultimately went to prison didn't care about the feud. If you want, it was just done for financial purposes. Obviously, that money isn't being pumped in there anymore or not being made available. Certainly Bomber has bigger fish to fry at the moment, doesn't he? So yeah, it's probably a sort of unpredictable outcome, isn't it, that the guys will be selling coffee, but you have to allow people to, they've done their time.
Well, 100%. And
and it's better they're selling coffee than
Mine's an Americano black.
Is it right? Well, maybe they'll
No milk,
send you
sugar,
one in. They did have a
strong
good,
as it possibly can, and short. I don't like those big, huge things. I just like a short black.
and they did have a good tagline. We'll finish with the
What is
tagline
it?
because it's the coffee stand is next to a bike shop.
Okay.
And they have advertising the shop recently. They said there was nothing better than a coffee and a pastry after a good ride. Okay. Do you want to end it there?
Well done, lads. Thank you.
Thanks.